And so again, you are welcome. Oh, hello, everyone. Now we're being recorded. Hello. So what I would love for you to do is just take a moment and think about, what type of questions may people have about family and community engagement? And if you feel like this is really not a question that I would ask, but I feel like some people might ask it, then, you can certainly just say, someone may ask, but I'm going to start with one question that I get a lot. And then hopefully there are additional questions I can answer. One question is, how realistic is it for an educator, for example, to connect with every family if they're a secondary educator and they have 100, 150, maybe 300 students that they need to connect to? Because when we're talking about family and community engagement, there's, the district connection to families in the community, there's school connection, and then there's individual teacher connection. And I sometimes hear it's just not realistic to imagine a teacher doing this. And so I want to share with you one strategy that Catlin Tucker and I wrote about in a book called The Shift to Student Led, because so often we're thinking about like, we need to do it, as opposed to we need to work together with students to cultivate it. And so one of the things that I would do in my classroom is I would say, of course, I want to connect to your families and your community, but I also want you to engage with families in the community about what's happening in school. And so every Friday we'd call it hooray, hooray, it's revision day. And I didn't provide any explicit instruction. I was an ELA teacher, so there was always close reading where you had to read things again and again. There was always rewriting because the best writing is rewriting. And so we would carve out some time for me to pull small groups and for students to work on revisions and do some peer review. But one of the things they did is they updated communication with their grown-ups. And at the beginning of the year, they would do an empathy exercise and think about like, what is the best way? And again, I taught middle school. What is the best way for you to communicate with the grownups in your life? Is that email? Is that text? Is that video? Is that phone call? And then every Friday, I would post questions about what they were really proud of or what they were working on. And they would update the communication and send it to their grownups. And so it wasn't me so much saying, okay, I need to send a video or I need to make sure that that's translated, because the kids could create the reflection in the language of their home and hearts. And they could decide, oh, I know that my parent will never check an email, but if I make this video and send it via text, then they'll be able to do it. And then they would just, add it to the classroom management system so that I could go in and reflect and see what they were working on and do small groups. And so even something like that, where it's about how do we work together to really truly connect with all families, and me sending out, this is what we did this week, to parents who are inundated with emails is very different from, oh, I just received a video from my son. Hey, mom, as you know, in English class, this is what I'm working on. And you're going to be super pumped because I revised that essay. And that was a really neat way to firm goals. We want to engage family in schooling. And how do we do that in a really culturally responsive way that's accessible? Let's ask kids, what's the best way to get this information to your grownups? So love that as a question, which I receive a lot. And we're going to start there. But now I'm going to scroll up and answer any questions that come up. And again, it could be about UDL in general. It could be about Universal Design for Learning in terms of family and community engagement. Whatever it is, I'm here for it. I have a question from Hadley. It says, we know the lack of choice creates barriers, but that too many choices can be overwhelming. How do you recommend applying this to family and school collaboration in special education? Now, I am a special education parent. So I have 4 kids, and one of my amazing children has some support needs academically and behaviorally and socially and emotionally. And so I absolutely understand the additional layer of collaboration that is federally required when a student has an IEP. And I think what it comes down to is, as a teacher, we often will create, like, I love a choice board. So if I was to say to students, I need you to explain what you've learned about the 3 branches of government. Here is the success criteria. Would you like to do it in writing? Would you like to do it in some sort of, multimedia tool like an infographic or a brochure or a PowerPoint? Do you want to do it using some sort of video or audio, or do you have like another idea? And then really extending the opportunity to be creative and critical thinkers and problem solvers, like to the end user. And what I find, the thing that works best for me as a parent is like at the very, very beginning of the process of determining eligibility for special education, saying to parents, for example, we have to have an initial meeting. Would you rather have that initial meeting in person, or would you rather have it virtually? Right? That's only one of two choices, right? And then you might say, would you like to facilitate it in English, or would you like there to be an interpreter or a translator there? Right? That's another option. But I think that even around that, like I know a lot about special education. The process is really, really, I would say, esoteric, right? My husband, who has an MBA, read my daughter's IEP and he's like, I don't understand it. I don't get it. Right. And he's like a very, very brilliant person. And so I'm also thinking about how are we really supporting families to truly understand their rights? Because the federal addendum that gets attached to the IEP, I don't think many parents, including those who do have the ability to decode at a grade level, those who do know English, it doesn't make a lot of sense without instruction, without really highlighting main ideas. And I have a lot of friends who reach out to me all the time whose students will become eligible, who will say to me, what does this even mean? What are my rights here? What should I do? How am I supposed to respond? And so we're thinking about accessibility as one lens, but I also just think, do parents of students who have support needs, who are eligible for a 504 for an IEP, do they understand that their students are always general education students first? Do they understand their right to be included in everything? That special education supplements and does not supplant general education? Do they know that they always have a right to invite a student to an IEP meeting? And at 14 years old, that is required to invite students to an IEP meeting. I don't think many parents understand their stay put rights and the fact that you do not need to be coerced into changing services. And so for me, it's not only about can we make it accessible? This is about providing education to parents, knowing truly what the rights are of families when you're navigating these services. So I think it goes significantly beyond this idea of how do we make sure they get the forms? How do we make sure something is translated? Because you could translate a chemistry text that is in French to me in English, but it's been a while since I've studied chemistry. So I would still be a little bit stuck and I would need really good instruction. And I'm not sure that parents get really good instruction from the districts who serve them and their children. So that would be my thought. I'm going to go back and make sure don't want to miss anything here. Okay, so ST. I have gone through a period where I have had to handle a lot of options. I feel this has helped me work with families dealing with multiple options. What is the best way to work together to make the best decisions? And what I would say is that we learn what works best for us by learning what doesn't work for us. And I think that we have to be very nimble as education institutions to essentially always go through the process of saying, how are we going to know if this works? Because if it works, let's keep doing it. And how are we going to know when it's not working so that we can change it? And how do we have that capacity to be flexible enough to make those changes when it is necessary? And I think that that's really what it comes down to, because if you tell me you have to choose one of these three placements and you can't change it again for a year, so you better get it right. Like I have anticipation anxiety even thinking about that. If you were to say to me, here are the options for this schedule this year, we can always amend an IEP. We can always bring the team back together. We truly believe that this is the best plan of action. So why don't we try it for 6 to 8 weeks? This is the outcome data that we're going to collect. We're going to communicate that with you. And then if we're making progress, like we expected to make, we're going to continue down that road. But ultimately, we will never make decisions that do not serve our learners and help them reach their goals. And so I think that sometimes it's just taking off the weight of, I can't tell you for sure which of these three pathways is going to be the best thing right now for your child. I can guess, I can make recommendations, but we haven't done it yet. So I don't know for sure. But I really feel like this is a pathway we should explore. We're going to eliminate as many barriers as we can and just know that I am available to you and we can make changes. And I was working in a school district in Massachusetts, and we were a very inclusive school district. So in my general education class, I would have students who historically, before they transitioned to the middle school, might have been in programs for, gifted and talented, might have been in programs for autism, might have been in programs for life skills or substantially separate or behavior or newcomers. And the middle school that I was in, we served all learners in general education. And there were some parents who said, I'm really nervous about this child who all through elementary school was in a substantially separate setting. And so our team would go and we would say, well, we can come to your home and we can meet you. You can come here. We're happy to meet you at a cafe or a public place. We'll bring an interpreter. But whenever we went and said, give us a chance for 6 weeks, because sometimes we have to build the routines. It may not happen right away. Success is not linear. Give us 6 weeks. And we never ever had a kid reverse their placement, ever. But I think it's just knowing that they weren't making a decision that was going to impact their child for a whole year. It's like, you can trust us, you can work with it. We do not know for sure that we're going to be able to meet the needs of your child right away, but we do know for sure that we will figure out what is working by collaborating with you, by asking our instructional coaches, by working with our special education liaisons. And I think that that goes a really long way. Again, making something accessible, making something comprehensible, but then also remembering that the human heart is at the core of all of this work. And, we have to make connections and say, I cannot tell you exactly what the best decision is, but I think weighing these options, this is a really good path to pursue. See if there's any comments on that. Feel free to throw anything in the chat, any reaction, any emoji, any follow-up questions. Okay, wonderful. Kristen. Since COVID, schools seem to have tight restrictions on parent participation in schools. What recommendation do you have to break down this barrier? As a follow-up to the ongoing complication with background checks. Yes. Okay, that is Kristen, there's so many layers to that question. So the first thing is just in general, school safety, right? So I'm not familiar with every state's restrictions, but I know that in order to have a parent in a school in Massachusetts, they have to pass a Corey background check. And there is no cost to a Corey in Massachusetts. So certainly, I think that as with all things, if you have families for whom cost is a barrier, I think that the district needs to, just like they would do for sports, just like they would do for field trips, work with the PTO and look at, your school activities funds and say, how do we ensure that we're not excluding any families in our public institutions based on money? So I would make it really clear we want all families to be involved. If money is an issue at all, please contact a counselor and we will eliminate that barrier, right? That's like one side of it. But even when you have the families who have, like, let's say past Corys, how do you get them really involved? Now, one of the things that I used to do, and I shared this in the webinar, is just asking families, like, tell me about yourself, tell me what you're really good at. And, sometimes I would the first argument project that we did was like, tell me why your hookups are awesome. My uncle owns this bakery, my cousin can rebuild a dirt bike. I am really good at making jokes. I've always been really good at being a class clown. And then kind of just leveraging, hey, I heard you're amazing at this. I heard you're, doing bakery. I would love to do an authentic project-based example, right? Would you share something with me? So I always tried to like connect, particularly with students for whom I was struggling to connect with. We used to do something when I was in middle school called silent mentoring. And I'm sure somebody who has very fast fingers can find it if you just Google my name and silent mentoring. Whitney, you're so good at that. But what we would do is we would wait until we were about 3-4 weeks into school. And the middle school that I worked at would then put the rosters of every single seventh grade child on one wall of the teacher's room. And in a 1 week period, all of us had to go to that room and highlight the name of every kid that we had a good connection with them and their families, right? So some kids you coach, some kids you're neighbors with if you live in the community, right? Some kids you just have parents that are like always, hey, how can I help? Hey, what do you need? And so everybody went through and highlighted, including bus drivers, including people who worked in the office, including, custodian, maintenance, right? We were all highlighting the same kids. It was devastating. The same kids over and over again. And we would have a number of kids who no one highlighted. And so what we would do is a silent mentoring of them and their grown-ups, whoever those grown-ups were. And we would go through this process of saying, you have to make contact with the kids and their grown-ups in whatever way is possible. And it was so funny because there was this one year I had this kid and I felt like I was a stage 5 clinger. I was like showing up at his locker. Every time I went into the cafeteria, I would be like, I'm just going to go say hi to that table. He must have thought I was so strange. But like I would go to his track meet so I could like track down, oh, who's here to watch you? And his mother would come to those sometimes. And, I had this connection to this kid all year of which I forced and didn't feel like he was the recipient of it all. And it was no matter what, you stick with it, right? You just keep putting it out into the universe. And I swear that it didn't work, right? Like I would have told you, it didn't work. I didn't connect with the kid. As much as I tried to reach out to the family, as much as I was willing to go to the house, right? It didn't work. I had him in 7th grade. He went on to 8th grade and they did a yearbook at the end of 8th grade because it was like a junior high. And at the end of 8th grade, kids leave like a message in the yearbook, like, I'm leaving the next class this soda machine because every day I like to get a Snapple and I want to say a shout out to, this coach. And the boy who I silent mentored one year, who I thought was the biggest failure of my family and community engagement of all time. At the end of 8th grade, he wrote, like, shout out to Mrs. Novak. She's the only person who ever understood me. And like, it's still like, I mean, he's like 35 years old now, but it still makes my heart so warm that it was like, I kept trying, I kept trying, I kept trying. And it didn't feel like it made a difference, but it did. And so, I love the idea of silent mentoring of families, of community members, to say somebody has got to make it. And again, maybe I can't do it with 100, but I can certainly do it with 2 or 3. And if we really divide and conquer all the amazing adults we have in our buildings, we absolutely can do that really well. So I'm going to try to find that really quick for you and I'm going to pop it in.
I put it in the chat if you scroll up and I'll repost
Oh,
it
you
again.
did. Oh my gosh, you're so fast. Okay.
Thank you for that. That was a great story.
My pleasure. Yeah, so there's a lot there. Okay, now there's a follow-up question. Yes. Okay, so Angie, our state, Massachusetts as well. Anyone who is in contact with students has to pass a Corey. Let's see. Okay, so I think I got to that question. That is wonderful. I am not sure. Again, I think different states will have different parameters, but I'm willing to guess that many probably want to make sure that anybody having interaction with children is not a danger to children. But I don't know. Barbara, do you know what happens in Ohio?
Sorry. Um, you know, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that in Ohio, uh, if there is other adult supervision, you're not alone with students, then it's okay. So to Meredith's point there about, being in the classroom, helping out, that kind of thing. But I think if you are going to say, provide reading tutoring, and you're going to be kind of alone with kids, then that's where that background check would come in. But I think that also, Ohio is local control, right? And so I could see districts kind of creating their own policies as well. Don't base your paycheck on anything I just said, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's unsupervised connection to a child on an ongoing basis. Like that's when background checks are required. I just put Ohio Revised Code
Oh, perfect.
in the chat, but that's what I thought.
I'm just reading this. Oh, the volunteer free grant. Okay. And Barbara added the layer of, you have federal law, you have state law, you have district policy. All of those kind of stack up. So it's a cascading system. And certainly it does make it a little bit more challenging. But that really is, I think when you're zooming out, like we have this, there are some families who are not connected at all. So, it's not even okay, I can't be involved very often in anything that's happening in the district because I'm often working during the school day. I'm in other schools and things like that. But even though I don't attend some of those things, I'm very engaged in the schooling of my children because I understand the standards. I understand the expectations of the district. I am very involved in the special education work for my daughter. And the real thing is, are there some parents who we're not connected to at all in that two-way communication? Because I think a lot of the times we're just measuring our output. I sent an email to all the parents and it's like, but maybe the same three always write back, thank you so much. We love these updates. And it's like, okay, so we've heard back from those three, but have we really heard back from every single family? And then really start targeting the ones that we have not heard back from. And you start getting kind of in more depth, where, you're starting to make phone calls, you're starting to try to arrange visits with families, you're starting to work with counselors, but there's almost like kind of a funneling system because there are some families who are engaged, involved already. And what we're trying to do is it's really like this targeted who is not involved yet and why not? And then how do we have to be more flexible and kind of stretch out to not only say, I want you to be able to receive information from the district, but I want to support you to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then I want you to be able to contribute to how this might look different because we're going to co-create something. And that was really the message of the webinar. It's not so much like, look, here's what we're doing. Look, come and listen to us, right? But we have to make sure that it's not only accessible, but truly comprehensible, authentic, meaningful, so that parents can take it home to, whatever is the space, where they're raising their children and better support them throughout that process. Yes, if our goal is more family involvement, that's a very good point. We do not want to make it harder for families to be involved. That is very, very true. I think that there's a lot of barriers that prevent engagement in general. And I like to think of them as a three-legged stool, right? You have mindset, you have skill set, and then you have systems. And so when I talk about how do we meet the needs of all learners, the first thing I always think about is this idea of mindset. Are we willing to listen to families? Do we want to connect with families? Are we interested in reaching out to our communities, right? Like that really is that first section. And so how do we make sure that we have the mindset where we're like, parents deserve to be involved with the education of their children? Okay, that's the mindset piece. The skill set is how do we actually connect with all families, right? Because it does take a skill set to know, like, how do we connect with families and we're not like overly communicating, right? Like I have 4 kids. There's probably 30 teachers between all of them because I have 3 that are in secondary school, like 30 emails a week updating me on what's happening in class. It's almost a little bit over communication, right? And so like we have to say like how do we do this really well? And how do we reach out? And, do I know the technology to share with parents? Like, am I really, really great at being able to find those pathways? Do I know how to have difficult conversations with families? Because I think that's we do a lot of work with leaders on having difficult conversations. Teacher education does not highlight as much as necessary how you have really difficult conversations with people, right? Because I think that it all comes down to we're all doing the best with what we have, and there is no reason for kind of the butting of heads between families and teachers. But I think that we'd have a lot of people who don't have a skill set to have those difficult conversations. I had a parent reach out to me once. This was so not culturally responsive of me in any way, shape, or form. I was first teaching argument. I was like 23 years old, and I was trying to be really authentic and meaningful for students. And so I was like, I'm going to teach you about kind of the 3 different lenses of rhetorical strategy. How do you make a really good argument? And you do that with logos and pathos and ethos, which are, essentially these kind of rhetorical lenses of you appeal to people's emotions, you provide them with really good facts, you appeal to authority and things like that. And so once I taught them how to do that, I'm like, I want you. And oh my, I'm like cringing. I don't even want to admit it, especially since this is being recorded, but I'm going to do it because we've all been there and we all have reasons to apologize to former family, students, people we've worked with. And so I said, I want you to think of something that your parents don't let you do, and I want you to create an argument for it. Now, I don't have kids at the time, obviously, because this is like the worst assignment idea ever. But I was like, it's going to be so awesome. So you choose anything you want. And so this one girl was like, she wanted multiple piercings in her ears. I'm like, oh, that's a great one. And she goes home and she does the homework, and it turns out there's this huge explosion. And I created this huge kind of family butting heads unnecessarily. And the father had every right to reach out to me and say, like, I am so frustrated right now. I am so frustrated. I'm trying to help my daughter and we're in a fight. And, as much as I wanted to be like, well, I was just trying to be relevant, I'm like, first of all, thank you for contacting me directly. Tell me more about what exactly happened. What was the harm? I want to own the harm, but also like, I really want to hear from you of how I might do this differently, because of course it was not my intent, but as soon as you brought it up to me, I absolutely recognize the impact. I'm going to do better, but can you please, I want, and then immediately like the heat was gone. And he's like, I'm trying to be involved. And I was like, no, I absolutely hear you. Tell me more, help me understand more. How do I do this better? Thank you for, right? And it's those types of conversations that create a relationship. And I think that if we don't have that skill set, that's going to be hard. So again, we have mindset, we have skill set, but then we have the systems barriers, right? And the systems barriers are things like, contractual obligations, school district policies, state laws, federal laws, where sometimes like the things that it's like, oh, I would love to do this, maybe legally, I'm not able to do it, or, it's not the expectation, right? So how do we create that stool? Because if one leg kind of falls out, it's really hard to balance. And so that's why it's out of maybe a teacher's hands to say which parents can and cannot be involved in a field trip. But it is always within my lens to like reach out and try to explain, why it's important, understand the value of keep people safe, having the difficult conversation with people as opposed to just kind of going, oh, I'm just going to email back. We need to make these connections, and email is often not the best way to do it. Email can be very, very heated. So I love that question. I'm going to look and see what I've missed here. Oh my gosh, this is such a good question because there's so many nested replies. Okay, good. It seems like we're working all of this out. Yes, in Massachusetts, if we were to have like a cookout and all school staff were there would not be any background checks. It's really like coming in and being the class reader, going out on field trips where you have a small group of students on your own. That all does require it. But I love that example. Whereas if there was a family night, if there was an open house, we're not looking for paperwork on that. Okay. What other questions do you have for me? We've done some really fun ones here. We've talked about silent mentoring. We've talked about background checks. We've talked about student-led progress updates. We've talked about really helping parents understand the special education process. There is a lot of different things we're discussing. What else do you have? My wait time is, I'm very good at wait time. So this is also a great time to maybe say, someone might wonder or someone might ask, because I love those types of questions too.
Katie, I'm going to jump in here and ask you something.
Please.
So, if you would put yourself in the shoes of a teacher and maybe walk us through just kind of briefly, quickly, the steps you would take to say, thinking about how am I going to, picking a goal, like I want my families to really understand their kids' progress, or I want my I'm trying to think of another, goal that they may have. You have a particular academic goal or behavioral goal, say, and you want to really sort of partner with families around it. So you're going to be doing things in your classroom, but you also want to partner with your students' families as well. So maybe just, I'm just pitch it out to you, pick something, and then like maybe what would the steps be that you would go through of like, landing on like what is the goal going to be? How am I going to monitor this? And then how am I going to go about like figuring out that I'm not going to be exclusive, I'm going to be inclusive in this, so voice, that sort of thing. Just maybe kind of walk us through that in an example.
Yeah. So the very first thing that I would do is that I would go to my how I'm evaluated on family and community engagement, because that provides us with the firm goals. So, it's like I might have my own interpretation of what family and community engagement means, but ultimately I would say, what really is the firm goal for the district? I'm a Massachusetts educator. And so when I look at what is it that I have to do, it says that you have to engage with families in a way that is equitable and collaborative by building positive relationships with all families characterized by mutual trust and respect. 2, providing a variety of frequent, inclusive, and culturally and linguistic responsive opportunities for all families to engage as partners in the classroom, and clearly and accessibly communicate information about family engagement opportunities. I'm going to drop that in the chat. So like, if I know that that is how I am evaluated as an educator, I would start that. And I would say, okay, those are my goals. And then I would do a diagnostic to determine essentially how many families feel as though I've already kind of met those goals. So, again, I know that a survey is not going to reach necessarily all families, but it does allow me to provide like a diagnostic of like who is going to respond right away, and can I get a baseline understanding of what family and community engagement looks like. So I might send a survey out on behalf of our team, for example, and I would say one of our goals this year is to build positive relationships with families with mutual trust and respect. How many of you feel historically in the previous grade that you had relationships with teachers that were characterized by mutual trust and respect? When you have had relationships that you felt like were characterized by trust and respect, what did that look like? What do you wish we did, right? And please, 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 you have the option to be anonymous, but we would love to follow up and have a focus group. You'll get a phone call if you're willing to have a conversation, right? So I think that a lot of the times we don't really know what a realistic amount of growth would be if we don't know what we're dealing with for a baseline. The next thing that I would probably do is I would have a spreadsheet with every family that I served, and I would every 4 to 6 weeks, really think about like which families I am connecting with. So I like to do positive phone calls home, like to send out emails with progress updates, a couple every couple of days. You start adding up and filling in the blanks. The parents who would come to our breakfast coffees, who would come in after school, that as a team, we would try to keep track of which of the families we were connecting with. And then I think that just exit tickets, we have to ask people how we're doing. And I think that that can be really scary because essentially there's 3 different types of feedback. And this is from the book, Thanks for the Feedback, written by Stone and Heen. But in it, they say, there's 3 types of feedback. There's evaluation, there's praise, and then there's like coaching or constructive feedback, right? And the purpose of evaluation is to really kind of know where you stand. But an evaluation is simply a rating based on some predetermined criteria. So if halfway through the year, I say to parents, could you please take 1 minute and just evaluate whether or not you felt as though we have a relationship that is mutually trusting and respectful? Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. That's an evaluation. That gives me a sense of what people perceive of me, but it doesn't help me improve. Praise creates replication. So when I ask what's working really well, it's because I want to know what it is so I can keep doing it. So I love that you always have those before school opportunities where your team provides coffee and childcare and homework help where we can give our feedback. I love the positive phone calls home, from at least one member on your team. I think it's really great when you send out those video updates with the student where you record your one-on-one progress monitoring conference and then they text it to me. That works really well. Okay, great. I know what to keep doing. So praise replicates performance. The problem is the only way that I can dig myself out of disagree or strongly disagree is to say, what am I doing that doesn't work? Or what do you wish I was doing that I'm not doing already? That's the coaching, that's the constructive feedback. And it's really hard to hear that because I am truly doing the best I can with what I have. I'm doing what I know. And when you reach out to families, and again, you're like, this is only a baseline, but I know that I have some things to work on. It comes down to, okay, so help me figure out what to try. And, when we do this really well, we'll start to notice, maybe there's only a couple of families who we're not connecting with, and then we can target our outreach and say, I really, really want your feedback on how I could do this better. And we try until we can get everybody saying, I strongly agree to all of those different things. But until we get there, we have to keep exploring other pathways. So I think that it really comes down to starting off, asking for feedback of the families coming in. Are they coming in feeling respected? Are they coming in feeling like the involvement is relevant, authentic, and meaningful? And are they coming in really understanding what opportunities they have to be connected? And from there, I have to try to figure out anyone who disagreed, what are the barriers and how do I do it better? Those who agreed, how do I keep doing that? And that comes back to firm goals and flexible means. But everything we do needs an outcome measure. And so I think that we're often talking about outputs. Look at what I did. I sent out this many emails. I had this many family nights. And there's so much of look what I did without saying, what actually is the outcome? And the outcome is going to be families who really feel like all of those things are true. So hopefully that was helpful. What else do you have for me? Oh, Meredith, I love this. Meredith has put in a couple of links here. Another really great lens for family and community engagement in relationship to progress monitoring, particularly for students who have lagging skills academically. And a lot of the rubrics that we use in our world are very deficit based. And it will, let's say, you have a rubric that says, if you were to get 4 out of 4, your work is amazing, it's beautiful. 3, it's pretty good. And then 2 is like, it's lacking, it's inaccurate, it's unclear. You get to 1 and it's like, it's wrong, it's bad, it's right. Now I'm being super fresh, but if you look at a rubric, you're going to see it. Right. And there's this really amazing work that's being done by Shelley Moore. Shelley Moore is an amazing consultant. She does a lot of work with inclusive practice. She is in Canada, but she talked about how it's so important for us to shift from a deficit-based rubric to an asset-based rubric. And I can pull up a slide deck that we presented together that as a parent, this would make my heart so happy to get information like this. So I just want to share with you the journey from kind of a deficit-based rubric to an asset-based rubric, okay? So I'm going off the cuff here. So I'm going to, if you could make it so I could share my screen, that would be amazing. Okay, I'm just going to wait a second so I can do it. And then I'm going to show you how we might do this differently. Okay, hold on. I'm going to hide a couple of pages here. Okay. I'm going to show you this in 1 second here. Okay, I want to make sure I have everything correct. All right. This is going to get real into the rabbit hole here, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. Okay, so let's start way back here. So this is generally when we are communicating with families, like, how's your child doing? This is generally the process on the top, which is I, as a teacher, I create find my learning standard, and then I use a deficit-based rubric, and then I create kind of a series of tasks, and I grade all of those tasks. And then the way that I communicate progress is like the gradebook sheet, right? That is very traditional. And how do we change that to say our role is really to help our families understand what students are learning, and at the end of a unit, what they have learned, without, I guess, punishing earlier attempts. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, a deficit-based rubric. And so the standard, again, I was an English teacher, analyze how an author develops and contrasts different point of views, right? Now, if that's what I'm looking for, most rubrics will look like this. And this is true of standardized testing rubrics. This is true of even when you get into, like your SAT and your AP, is like the 1 point is minimal, irrelevant, misunderstanding, incorrect, missing, vague. That's the type of language that we see. And that's really deficit-based language. And I have used rubrics like this my whole life. And basically what I'm communicating to parents is like, nah, your child is largely incorrect. Like, oh gosh, it's so icky. It makes me itchy and I don't like it. But I just didn't know another way. And so basically we take that standard. Ultimately, the rubric at the end is comparing this point of view of 2 different characters. And so in a grade book, now this is my daughter's name, Aylin. In a grade book, I might say, okay, first we're going to do a diagnostic quiz on what students know about point of view. She got a 2, right? And then we're going to read an excerpt of a text for homework. Nope, didn't do that. And we're going to talk about the first character, Yosef, then the second character, Isabel, and then we're going to get to truly comparing and contrasting those characters. Now that is the standard. But if I was going to be updating the family on progress, I would say, your child has failed. My child did not fail because by the time we get to the end of the unit, my child got an 8 out of 9 in the actual standard, right? And so when we're communicating, right, and we have this like first layer of like, okay, I want the parent to know how the kid is doing, but like, do I really want the parent to get this information. And now I told you we're going into the matrix here because this is so much bigger than this family and community engagement. But what really are we giving families anything helpful, right? Like when the family receives this, what does it say? Your kid is failing. And then we start saying like, well, could you go back and redo the quiz on point of view? And it's like, it was a diagnostic assessment. It should have never counted. Diagnostic and formative assessments should not ever negatively impact student grades. They can be marked as a formative evaluation, but they cannot be graded until we are done teaching and learning, right? And so we look at this and we say, well, what kind of message does that send? If our job is to communicate to families, what is it that your child really has to know? How can you better understand what your child really has to know? And where are they on their journey? I'm going to explain how I'm going to better support them. I would love for you to know what we're working on so you can better support them. But it's the wrong lens if the parent is just like, why didn't you finish that quiz? Why didn't you read that text? As opposed to what really is it that we're trying to build in kids? Right? What is the nature of the discipline in literacy? And that is so much more powerful than normally what we're communicating to our families. And so really we should say, if we were doing a standards-based report card, it washes all of that out because ultimately she did meet the criteria for proficiency for evaluating that standard. But how many things do we mark that are not used to evaluate a standard? And so what Shelley said was, how do we really think about commuting to families? What is essential? What is the success criteria for grade level writing, for grade level science, right? What is it that students have to know and do? And how do we help families understand that? And then how do we add complexity as opposed to pulling away complexity to create something deficit-based? So I saw this and literally went back and changed every single rubric for the graduate course that I teach, changed every rubric I created for mini lessons that I give to, families as yes, ST, backward design. And so let's just take something wild like the next generation science standard. Again, you can see on the bottom, this is Shelley Moore's. But we have these science and engineering practices. We have this disciplinary core ideas. We have cross-cutting concepts. It is so rich. Do families understand this? Right? Or do they look at a grade in science and go, oh, my kid's doing good in science or not good in science? But like, what really is it that we're trying to do, right? We're trying to help them solve problems. We're trying to help them, transfer and apply learning. And what does that mean to kids? And so what Shelley essentially does is she takes each standard and she says, okay, so if the learning goals in student-friendly or family-friendly language is this, an asset-based rubric would look like this, meaning that it is absolutely essential that every student plan and creates a model. They have to describe what bulk matter is, right? They have to be able to describe what microscopic and macroscopic are. And this is for the whole entire unit. And to be able to say to families, right now, they're not yet independently planning and creating a model, but they are following along and they're working with their peers to create a model. And this is the lens she uses to say every single child has access and entry points to grade level learning and therefore should be included. And as a family, I say, oh, okay, so my child can describe that some things are really large and some things are really small. And I know that they're working towards using microscopic and macroscopic. If I know that, if you can communicate that to me, that is not a heavy lift as a parent to be involved in using those two words, right? What are the cognates there, right? How do they transfer across languages? But like this right here is, I really feel like where it's at in terms of how do we better communicate to families what kids are learning, what they know, and how they are doing in building knowledge, as opposed to how they are doing in remembering to bring in things from home, how they are doing being able to answer things in a 20-minute quiz, right? And so I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's a really interesting lens to say, do families really, really understand what is happening in school so that they can support that work at home? So again, I'm happy to follow up and share those slides with you. But Hadley, I felt the same way, that I presented with Shelly when she shared this and then was like, oh my gosh, I'm only gonna do this by now. Because I found, in full transparency, that when I contacted families of children for whom I was concerned about their progress, I was very deficit based in telling them what their child could not do. And I really wished that I had gone with, this is what your kid can do already, and this is what we're working on. And if I could go back, I would.
I think
Kristen,
that's,
I would love Shelly Moore to get in front of every teacher ever.
I think Katie, you're hitting on like the growth mindset sort of ways of speaking, that we can create a lot of anxiety for families, or a lot of, we can suck a lot of joy and a lot of hope out of the conversation when we're speaking to, and you're speaking to that here. And so how just shifting, you still have the learning standard, you still, but, and there's still the progressions, but it's not the lack of, it's the, where we are now, where we're going. It's just, to me, it speaks of hope, speaks, it's kind. I don't leave that meeting with you feeling like I've been beaten down, which I don't think anybody intended to beat someone down in the, beforehand, right? But we were just trying to be clear and be, share how students were progressing. So.
Okay, I'm going to put those slides really quickly. I just made a copy of them. Here are the slides. There you go. And also, I'm going to put a link to Shelly's website, because she has a tool that she uses to unpack. Let's see. Okay. Any other thoughts that you have, Barbara? I know we're coming up to the end of our hour here.
I think this has been really helpful. And when you first dove into those slides, I went, where are we going, Katie? But I love where we landed. I love that, we sort of demonstrated, we got to sort of feel the shift that was being made. And for educators, but then to think about families and communicating that. And as you said, that this is doable, micro and macro. Okay. And I think that when we speak in more deficit terms, as you said, it's hard to know, like, where do I even begin? So I think that was just a great example. So thank you for that.
Oh my goodness. It is my pleasure. But that's, again, I think it comes down to, I don't know, like, this idea of like true mutual respect. Like, the way that I would talk to, like, look, believe me, I'm the expert. This is what you need to do. Like, that's not what I was going for exactly, but I think that that's how many of us learn to do it.
Sure.
Where, like, make sure that, you are the expert. This is what you need to do, as opposed to, I have a lot of expertise in the nature of this discipline, but you have a lot of expertise in your child. And together we have expertise in, ultimately how we're going to co-serve, children. And again, the way that we talk to people really matters.
Yeah, it does. I love that you brought in that, we do, like, the knowledge and the gifts and the knowledge the teachers have of kids in this setting, around this content, with their learning, and having the context of having had so many students. When you're a parent, you're like, you've got that other context. It's deep knowing of this person, of this child. But my context is like maybe my other kids, maybe my friends' kids, right? Like, I don't have that bigger context. And but there's so much to, I'm glad that you brought up mindset and the skills and practices in the system. And I think that was just a great reminder for all of us to, like, we need to work in all of those areas. And I think too, kudos to our younger or newer educators, and just all of the emotions and the sort of fear that can be there, not having maybe practiced a lot or had a lot of courses on how am I going to deal with a conflict with a parent, right? So there's all of that muddles in there as well. So I think you just really spelled out some really helpful tools and approaches. And I wrote down several of these examples that I just think are like nuggets. I love these nuggets of particularly because you picked up on the power of students engaging their families, because we are as a team really thinking through how much we as adults talk, and our kids are in the middle and we're not including them in this. And so I'm glad that you raised that up, that power of kids articulating their progress and doing it in a way that they know their family's going to understand it and get it, and creating the space for that. So thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We have the slides, and Whitney, am I posting a link here? I have one.
Yeah, we just want to send one final reminder. If you haven't taken the survey, please let us know how we can improve. It fits right in with what Katie was saying about feedback. Thanks for the feedback. We do take all your comments seriously. And so if you can take those before you end your day, that'd be great.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to join us today. Thank you, Katie, for going with whatever we brought to the table. We appreciate that.